Your Bibles, I encourage you to open up there as well.
Ruth and Boaz at the threshing floor. Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, get dressed in your best clothes, then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do."
Thank you very much. Very good job reading, by the way. It's not very often I ask them to read things like winnowing barley. And so very, very well read. Good morning and welcome. We are glad you are here with us this morning. We have been doing a series called Hope in the Midst of Hopelessness and talking about those moments in our lives where we wonder, what can possibly go wrong next? How can I go through this and time and again? God, why would you put me through all of these things? And that mindset, that mentality of utter hopelessness in our lives, the pain of losing loved ones and the struggles of cancer and divorce, and the list just goes on and on. And so today we are continuing on in the series of Hope in the Midst of Hopelessness, and there's a lot more hope today. We're going to be in Ruth chapter 3, and in case you've missed the past few chapters, here's what has happened, just a little bit of a refresher or pick me up on this. The story starts out during the time of Judges. Now, the time of Judges is not a good time in Israel's history. It's kind of a lawless time. Everybody did what they wanted to. People took advantage of each other. People robbed each other. It was the weak prey, or the strong prey upon the weak. And that's the time period that this book takes place in. During time of the Judges, there was a famine in the land. And so people were struggling to eat. There wasn't enough food. And so a man named Elimelech, and Elimelech is from a little town named Bethlehem. And hopefully you've heard of Bethlehem before. That's where Jesus is born. He is from Bethlehem. And Elimelech takes his wife and his 2 sons, and he moves them to a nearby country called Moab. Now, Moab has always been at war with the people of Israel, so it's not like it's a great place to be moving. But he moves there because there's a chance for food. There's a chance to provide for his family. And so he moves them to Moab. Now, once they're in Moab, Naomi and her husband and her sons, her husband goes ahead and dies. It doesn't tell us how or how expected or anything, but Elimelech dies, leaving a widow, leaving Naomi and her 2 sons. Now, her 2 sons were getting old enough that they were at an age where they could marry. And so her sons married and began working, and they provided for their mother. Now, being a widow, Naomi really didn't have any means of taking care of herself. She now was waiting on her boys to take care of her. They were her means of living and being okay, was her boys. That was her only chance. And so, being a widow in a faraway land, she relied upon them. They took wives. Moabite women, and not long after they took wives, both of her boys died. And so here's Naomi in a land far away, and a widow, and no family nearby to take care of her, and she's in the midst of hopelessness, utter hopelessness. Where do I turn? How can this possibly get any worse? And Naomi says it herself, "I'm bitter." She's bitter. She is angry at God. God, why would you do this to me? She says, God's hand has come against me. And she feels utter hopelessness. But at the end of chapter 1, there's a glimmer of hope. Because she hears that back in Bethlehem, the barley harvest has started and that the famine has ended. And so she takes and tells her daughter-in-laws, let's go back. Now, along the journey, she tells her daughter-in-laws, you know what? It makes no sense. You two don't need to take care of me. Why don't you return to your homeland? You don't need to come to my land. And one of her daughter-in-laws turns around and goes back. But her other daughter-in-law, Ruth clings to her and says, don't ask me to leave you again. Where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Where you die, I will die. And so Ruth and Naomi make their way back to the land that Naomi was from. Now, upon arriving in Bethlehem, they returned to a lot of questions. Where will we live? What will we eat? How are we going to survive? Naomi has returned home, but there's no husband at home to provide for her. There's no relatives that are seeking her out to say, oh, come into our house and let us provide for you and let us take care of you. That's not the case. There is no government programs. And so Naomi sends Ruth off to gather grain behind the harvesters. Common practice in their day, and it is actually provided for in the law of God, that when God said, you know what, leave, if it falls to the ground afterwards, leave it. Leave it so that those who are passing through, the traveler and the widow and those who can't provide for themselves, that they can pick it up and they can survive, so that there's something left for them. And so Ruth heads off to collect. But remember, this is a dangerous time. This is a time where people take advantage of each other, and the weak or the strong prey upon the weak. And Ruth is weak. She's a single girl. And this is a dangerous place. Now, we learned last week about God's providence and how He provides and how it's not coincidence when our needs are met. Well, God is orchestrating an amazing thing in chapter 2. Ruth happens, by God's providence, to end up in a field of a man named Boaz. Boaz is a wealthy man, and wealthy enough that he not only has people who harvest his field for him, but he has people who manage the harvesters of his field, and he doesn't even have to be there at all. Boaz doesn't even have to go out to the field, but by God's providence, it happens just so by God's providence, that Boaz goes out to this field on this day, and he checks it. And then by God's providence, that while he is out there in a field that he doesn't even need to be in, he notices a young woman named Ruth. And so God weaves all these things together, and Boaz just happens by God's providence to be the redeemer for the family, a man tasked with marrying a widow and helping out her family and being there for them. Ruth returns home at the end of chapter 2. And her mother-in-law, Naomi, who had been bitter and angry and so concerned about how is this all going to work, and God, will you even provide for me? God, have you turned your back on me? God, have you forgotten me? All of a sudden, Naomi realizes God has not forgotten them. He's always been watching out for them and has always had this plan from the very beginning. Now at this point, we come to chapter 3. And at the beginning of chapter 3, Naomi hatches a plan. Okay, this is a little bit like the Fiddler on the Roof, Jewish matchmaking stuff going on. There's an element of that going on here. The mother-in-law is getting her fingers in. She's going to meddle in her daughter-in-law's relationship. Now Naomi no longer is sitting there saying, you know what, it's all hopeless, we don't stand a chance. Naomi is no longer saying, hey, the plan before this was that the two of them were just going to scrub out a living. Okay? That's what Ruth meant when Ruth said, hey, I will go to your people will be my people, your God will be my God. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. And there I will die. When Ruth says that, it's kind of this, we'll make it work, but it's not going to be pretty. That was the plan. Go and scrub out a living, try and make ends meet, try and just have enough bread on the table that we can get by. That was the plan. But all of a sudden the plan has changed. Because Ruth comes home with good news. Ruth comes home with this idea that, you know what? There's a man named Boaz. And Naomi all of a sudden starts to hatch a plan. She's figured it out. Boaz, he sent you with all this food? Boaz likes you. There's something here. And she starts to think in her mind, you know what? God has taking care of us. This isn't going to be scratch out a living and just barely get by. God has been watching out for us, and so Naomi has a plan. And the plan is just what Maddie read for us this morning. Is that you go, and he's going to be threshing his barley. He's going to be separating the grain from the stalk. That's what he's going to be doing. And so you go to where he is doing that. And at the end of his long day of work, he's going to lie down right there. He's going to do that because he wants to protect his crops, okay? He's not going to leave because his crops are all there. He's going to want to protect them. So he's going to sleep at the threshing floor. And tonight, I want you to go and lay on his feet. And I tell you, you start to read this. And it's interesting, but there's way too much talk about feet in chapter 3. 4 times the feet are mentioned in chapter 3 of Ruth. And so it's this interesting idea, but God is giving us a point. And that is, it's a strange thing to do, to lay down and cover someone's feet, but that's exactly what Ruth does. She lays down, covering Boaz's feet, just as her mother-in-law told her to do. Now this is a symbolic gesture. Make no doubt about it, when Ruth does this, she is kind of bowing at his feet. She's coming to his feet. It is an act of submission. It is also a proposal of marriage. It is coming to his feet and saying, I recognize you as the head of my house. It's coming helpless to him and saying, I don't have everything I need. I want to serve you. I want to be with you. I want to cover your feet. I want to be there for you. And she asks him, place the edge of your cloak upon me. Put your covering and your protection on me. Now, I want you to understand, there's nothing sexual going on in chapter 3. Okay? It sometimes might seem that way, but it really isn't. That is not the point. The scriptures are clear on that. That's not what's going on here. It is a proposal of marriage that is what is happening. Is this woman is coming helpless to her Redeemer, bowing at his feet, covering his feet, and saying, would you protect me? Would you bring me under your covering, under your care? And that's what she's doing. So now what will be Boaz's reply? Will he be glad, or look at her as a burden? Because let's face it, she's not bringing much to the table. Here's a woman, and she's not an Israelite. Her name has no clout. She's not going to, in fact, if anything, she's bringing you burdens because she brings along a mother-in-law that needs taken care of. She's not bringing you anything good, and so you wonder, what will Boaz's response be? But we need to remember, Naomi knew what she was doing here. As a meddling, matchmaking Jew mother-in-law, she knew what she was doing here. She saw the extra grain. She heard her daughter-in-law Ruth say that he said, stay here and I'll protect you and don't leave my people and I'll make sure nobody harms you. And he let you eat with him. And Naomi says, he likes you. And that you don't go anywhere else. He likes you. And so Naomi knew what Boaz's response would be. Naomi knew that Boaz liked Ruth, that he wanted Ruth. And so she says, do this and it's going to go well. Picking up in verse 10. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after younger men, whether rich or poor. Ruth goes and she lays down at his feet. She lays at his feet, and when the moment comes and Boaz is going to decide, am I mad or am I happy about this? He says, the Lord bless you, my daughter. He is excited about this. He is happy about this chance. And he says, you have showed an even greater kindness than before. Now the kindness that was showed before is this. When he talked to Ruth in chapter 2, he said, I have heard of the kindness that you showed to your mother-in-law Naomi. How you could have gone home to your homeland. How you could have gone and built a new life. How you could have gone and had things right again. But instead you chose to stay with her and take care of her. And he credited her kindness. And now here he says, this is a greater kindness. Because you haven't chosen a younger man. You didn't go and choose some young, fine man from the city. No, you came to me. Now we know that there's a little bit of an age gap. We don't know how much. But Boaz is a little bit older. We don't know. We get the feeling that Ruth is probably a pretty good-looking woman. We don't know if Boaz is kind of not or what the situation is. But Boaz looks at this situation and he says, you have shown a kindness because you wanted me. You didn't go chasing after everything else. You just said, I want you. And he appreciated that. And he says, this is a greater kindness. She has chosen Boaz. And Boaz says, you didn't chase the young men of the town. You didn't go after the richest man in town, although Boaz is well off. He says, you didn't chase the richest man in town. You didn't go after the youngest or the best looking, but you wanted me. And he is thankful for her kindness. Now, before we get to wedding bells and happily ever afters, let's stop and look at the relationship between this woman and her Redeemer. And not only this woman and her Redeemer, but what that teaches us about our relationship with our Redeemer. Because we too have a Redeemer. The first thing that we learn is that there is a proper way to come to our Redeemer. There is a proper way to come to our Redeemer. Ruth is told to go to the Redeemer. But there's a specific way that she is to come to him. She doesn't come to him face to face. She doesn't come demanding, hey, you are my Redeemer. You're the one that's supposed to take care of me, so marry me and take care of me. She doesn't do that. She doesn't come and get in his face. She doesn't come and yell at him. She doesn't even come and come to him face to face. Instead, she comes and she covers his feet. She bows down at his feet. Ruth is told to go to a Redeemer in a very specific way. At his feet. Helpless. Nothing to give but herself. Nothing to give but herself. She isn't here bartering and saying what good things she has to offer. I mean, that's not what Ruth's doing. She's not listing off all of her attributes saying, look at me, you want this. That's not what she's doing. She instead is coming and saying, I don't have anything to offer you. In fact, I'm bringing baggage. But I want you. And that's what Ruth says to Boaz. She comes to her Redeemer helpless and humble. Helpless and humble. All too often we forget what that looks like when we come to our Redeemer. Because we have a Redeemer, and our Redeemer is better than Boaz. We have a Redeemer in Jesus Christ. We, like Ruth, have a Redeemer, but ours is better. He takes our sin away. We have a Redeemer who takes our pain away. We have a Redeemer who is better than Boaz. We have everything we could ever want in our Redeemer in Jesus. But when we come to him, it's never seems to be that we come to him helpless. We always seem to come with an air of, I have it all together. I've got it figured out. You know, I like you, Jesus, but I don't necessarily need you. That's the way we like to come to Jesus. That's the way we like to come to church. We like to come to church and, hey, I'm okay. You know, church is great and I like Jesus, but I don't need anything. Like, I'd be okay without it. I'd be okay without God. I'd be okay without Jesus. I'd be okay without church. I don't necessarily need any of those things. They're good, but I'd be okay without it. And that's what we tell ourselves. And if you don't tell yourself that, you probably act like it. And we live that out that, you know what, I'm okay. Even if I didn't have Jesus, I'd still act the same. I'd still do the same things. And we act like it's no big deal. Instead of coming to our Redeemer, bowing and covering his feet, instead of having a spirit of humility, instead of having a spirit of helplessness, we come to God and say, you know what, I got this. You're great and all that, but I think I got this. I don't necessarily really need you. And this is our attitude more often than not. Jesus is nice and all, but if I didn't have him, I'd be all right. But that's not the attitude that you come to your Redeemer with. That's not the attitude that you come to your Redeemer with. Look at Ruth. She comes to him and she bows at his feet saying, I've got nothing to offer. I got baggage. I'm not bringing you anything that you need from me. But I'm here. And I offer you everything I am. And you come helpless to your Redeemer. You come helpless to your Redeemer. And that needs to be our attitude. That when we come to our Redeemer is with the mentality that, you know what, I am utterly helpless without you. I need you, Jesus, more than I need my next breath of air. I need you more than I need anything else. We cannot forget the message of Ruth 3, that we must come helpless to our Redeemer. Understand that we are nothing without Him. Understand that this life is going to be rough without Him, and that we can't make it. That we need Him no matter what it costs. We must come helpless and humble. But too many of us, we believe so much better of ourselves. And so we don't come humble and we don't come helpless when we really need to. I want you to imagine this. What if Ruth had said, "Hey, Boaz, I like you, but Naomi and I, we got this covered." Like, it's a flat-out lie. Like, they need him. Like, life is going to really be bad if they don't have him. Like, they're going to scrub out a life that's going to be rough, and they might not make it but a few months or a year. Like, life is going to be rough. But what if she had come with that air of arrogance? What if she had come with that attitude, saying, "You know what, I like you and all, but I don't need you." See, all too often we like that attitude of, "I don't need anybody. I can do it on my own." But that is not a scriptural attitude, and that's not the way we come to our Savior. That's not the way we come to our Redeemer. We can't come to Him with the attitude of, "I'm okay without you." We have to come helpless and say, "I need you no matter what. I need you no matter what." It's not charity. We need Him. We must not treat our Redeemer like this. We must not treat Him as though He doesn't matter, as though we would be okay without Him. We must come helpless to our Redeemer, bowing at His feet. And the second thing that we need to learn here is that our God, He's joyful when we pick Him. Our God, our Redeemer, is joyful when we pick Him. Remember Boaz's response. "This is a greater kindness than the one you showed before. This is greater than what you did for your mother-in-law. You have chosen me." Boaz is overjoyed because she chose him. She didn't choose someone younger. She wasn't chasing wealth or stature or looks. She chose Boaz because he's Boaz. She chose him for him, and our Redeemer feels the same way. We have a Redeemer, and He's not the youngest. That's funny. He's not the youngest. Our Redeemer's thousands of years old, but He's not young. And He doesn't have all the sexy things and all the enticing things of the world can. And He's not going to look like, hey, that, I want that. But we look at Him, and I tell you, He longs for us to choose Him and lay it all down and say, "I choose you." Ruth has chosen her Redeemer. And she comes helpless to Him, holding nothing back, humble and committed before Him. And this is the way we must choose our Redeemer. This is how we must come to our Redeemer. We cannot come to Him holding it back, saying, "Yeah, I like Him, but you know what? If I didn't have Him, I'd be okay." We cannot do that. We must come to our Redeemer humble and helpless, saying, "I need you. I need you." Ruth has chosen her Redeemer, and this is exactly what our Redeemer wants from us too. The way that Boaz looks at this and says, "You have done a great kindness in choosing me," and saying, "I'm not going to chase after the younger men, and I'm not going to chase after the wealthiest men. I'm not going for looks. I'm not after all these things." And our God has the same joy when we choose Him. When we come before Him and we're just choosing Him because He's Him. We're not choosing Him because, you know what, He's younger than the others. We're not choosing Him because He's the wealthiest. We're not choosing Him. We're choosing Him because He is Him. And that's what our Redeemer wants from us. That we would come helpless before Him and that we would choose Him above all else. This morning, that's what He wants from you. For some of you, you've never made a decision to follow Jesus in the first place. And you need to. You personally have not ever decided that you want Him, that you need a Redeemer, you need someone to save you from your sins and from hell. I tell you, you need to fall before Him. Come humbly to His feet. For some of you, that might look like coming forward and making a confession. For others, it might mean that you're going under those waters of baptism and making that gesture for everyone to see. For others in here, you've made the decision, you've made the commitment and said, you know what, I believe in Jesus, but you haven't lived it out and you haven't been humble. You haven't come to Him helpless. And today is a reminder, come to Him helpless. You don't need to come up front, you don't need to go under the waters again. But you need to say a prayer and tell Him, Jesus, I need you. And I'm not bringing anything to the table. You don't need me, I know it. But I need you. And many of us in here need to say those words to Him. To come humble, holding nothing back. To come helpless before our Redeemer. This morning, this is a great story. And I love this story. Because the story is bigger than Ruth and Boaz. This story is the story of Jesus. I don't know how many great-great-grands this is, but Boaz and Ruth, these are Jesus' ancestors. This is why they returned to Bethlehem for Him to be born. Because this family, they're from Bethlehem. Because this is His household, and this is our Redeemer. Boaz was a good Redeemer, but Jesus breaks the mold. He is the best Redeemer that we could ever ask for. And we need to call on Him today. As the praise team comes up, we're going to sing, Lord, I Need You. And those words could not be more fitting than this morning. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Will you sing with us? Will you sing those words? If you need to say a prayer and say, Jesus, I don't have anything to offer, but I need you. Say those words to Him this morning. Give that over to Him. Because we have a Redeemer who is worthy of our praise. Would you stand with us?